All right. Hello, everybody. Let me introduce myself again. I'm Beej, one of the computer science instructors here. I don't believe we've talked since the first time we talked during the computer science intro all that time ago. So I hope I do all right, and you are always free to tell me if I'm not doing all right. So just let me know how things are going. This week is kind of a strange sprint. So I'll start off with why it's strange, and then we'll kind of discuss why we're doing this sprint at all. So it's a little bit weird because so much of it is boilerplate code. So Django is a web framework. Turns out it's pretty powerful, but there are a lot of steps you have to go through in a particular order to get stuff done. And those steps aren't really mentally that taxing. It's just stuff that you do. And so we're going to have a whole bunch of these things that we go through, and it takes a little while to go through the first time, and the creativity is not so high during this part. But once we get all the framework in place, then we can be more creative, and we can add more stuff to it then. So in some ways, it might be kind of like a break, the opposite of an algorithms week, for instance, where you're basically bending your brain into pretzel-like contortions. And this one might even feel a little bit light. Some people lament the lack of challenge during this week. But we try to load it up with more stuff so that there's at least a big breadth of things in there. Secondly, I'd like to apologize for not giving you the pre-course videos on Friday because I continuously forget to do that. So today we'll cover some of the stuff that was in the pre-course videos. And if you want to review React, I'll never stop you. The week after this, you'll have the opportunity to do some good old React coding, though, if you want, during project week. But every day after the lecture, I should give you more pre-course material so that we don't have to go through all this stuff in class, which is kind of dull. And you can go through it at 2x speed if you want on video. What was I going to say after this? Another recurring theme of mine. I remember that I have 3 things to say, and then I can only remember 2 of them. That's okay. It'll come back to me later, I'm sure. Before I go on, though, what's everybody heard, if anything, about Django? It does use Python. You've heard it's better than Node. I too have heard that it's better than Node, but I've also heard that Node is better than Django. So, like Express, but for Python, yeah. Easy integration with SQL is a biggie. Opinionated is definitely true. And we will be studying it this week. Yeah, this is all good stuff. I'm about to share my screen, but I decided I should probably clean it up first. It's covered with computer architecture stuff. Ew. We'll get to that later. It does set up an admin page. Something really nice and easy to use. All right, come on, GitHub. Let's make this happen. GitHub's been having all kinds of fun trouble. Oh, yes. Takes the model and converts it to SQL. What should we even talk about first? Let's talk about, let's do some general stuff and then talk about that SQL stuff, because that's pretty neat. So in general, it is another web framework. It does use Python, so you have all that right. In fact, everything everybody said has been right. So if you're in a Python environment already, maybe it makes sense to use a Python framework to do your work in. Some people use Django for doing both back-end and front ends of applications. It's got a multi-page app style front end that you can build up. Of course, single page applications are way more popular now, so Django's not so hot at that. What is a common thing to have happen is to use Django for the back end and implement your RESTful API or your GraphQL API on the back using Django, and then use React or whatever on the front end to get your single page application out of it. So this week we will be concentrating more on building a REST API with Django, as opposed to the Django front end stuff, which is slightly less useful. But why are we even learning another framework at all? Why would we learn another framework? Ideas? What do you guys think? Options and breadth of knowledge and commonly used. These are all good ones. And learning to learn. I love it. The more things you have in your toolbox of your breadth of knowledge, the more ideas you can bring to bear on solving a problem. And maybe you'll come across a problem that Django is the perfect match for. Or maybe you'll come across a problem that Django is only partially a perfect match for. But the fact that you know Django allows you to make that assessment and say like, oh, hey, Django is a 70% good match for this. Node's an 80% good match. Maybe we should use Node for that. And I also believe that when you build up your web of knowledge, all these little things like Django, we're going to learn how the Django way of thinking. And that's a way of setting up your data, a way of interacting with a database. It is opinionated. It has its way of doing stuff. And when you learn its way of doing stuff, that's something you can actually use in the future. Even if you're not using Django, you can say, oh, hey, I remember Django set its stuff up kind of like this. And while I'm building this project, I'm going to set my stuff up the same way. I'm going to build my own little mini part of Django that I liked. So it gives you that kind of knowledge. Plus, it gives you a little bit of perspective. You've had so much time with Express and Node, we can take a completely different view of how to do exactly the same thing, that is, set up the RESTful API and do it in a different way. Build up that web of knowledge and learning to learn, of course, because Node Week was too easy. Django's pretty easy too. It's just when you leave out one of the steps, which I'm bound to do today at some point, things can get a little bumpy all of a sudden. Oh, so yeah, these are all the reasons why we do this. Some people go on to use Django in their labs project at the end of the program. I'd say probably about 1 in 6 projects use Django. And some people do that just because they want more practice with a different framework. Some people don't do it because the time crunch is severe and they don't want to practice with another framework while they're trying to meet the deadline. Depends on the project. Aaron Gallant, the data science lead instructor here at Lambda, huge fan of Django. Had a lot of work experience with it. And I got to say, when you get it down, the thing moves pretty quickly, pretty powerfully. The SQL thing. Actually, I should stop here. I don't know that anybody would have any questions at this point, but if anybody has any questions, what would they be? Or comments about Django or anything else. I'm sorry, I'm drinking all this stuff because this morning before work, I put together like this slow cooker stew for dinner, and it had a bunch of cayenne pepper in it. I think I inhaled some. Ben does have good beer. The most breweries per capita in the country, I think. Data-centric projects, for sure. It's, as we'll see, and whoever pointed it out earlier, Erica, says it takes your data and it automatically converts it to SQL. Now, let's see. You're CS12, so you did a bunch of SQL, right? Some of the earlier cohorts hadn't done any SQL by now, but you all have done SQL, right? Great. My job is so much easier. So you may remember that one thing that SQL is not so good at is altering the tables. Like, it's happiest when you decide early on what your data structure is, what your schemas are, you set up your tables once, and then you don't change them much. Changing the table, while you definitely can do it with an alter table statement, is something that it's not particularly happy doing usually. So it's a painful process to go through. Django tries to automate that process as much as it possibly can, and it turns out it does that to a pretty high degree, pretty effectively. So all this management of, oh, hey, I want to add some more fields, Django's like, no problem, we'll make that happen. We'll change the database for you. I'll write all the SQL for you so you don't have to write any, and I'll change the database and populate it the way it needs to be populated. So it's pretty neat that way. Not only that, but it's got this fantastic ORM, the object relational mapper, that allows you to do pretty crazy queries against the database without ever writing any SQL. It's an area where I am not a master, but we'll cover some of those things and try them out. I think, yeah, so the SQL part is definitely the strength. I think everybody, even people who don't like Django, are like, all right, the way Django handles SQL, that's actually pretty cool. But because it's so opinionated, we end up with people kind of polarized on it. There aren't many people that I think are neutral on Django. They kind of, instead of having a nice bell curve of interest, instead it probably piles up on either end. Where people are like, I love it. And other people are like, this is dumb. So on that front, like politics, exactly. It's like connects and politics mixed together. On that front, I do have a little aside about having opinions about languages and frameworks and technology. We're all human, so of course we all have opinions. My opinion of C++ as a language is particularly low. Not my favorite language. But that said, I would encourage everybody to be an exceptional developer in whatever language or framework you're presented with. Sometimes you'll be at work and they'll be like, hey, we have this subsystem and it's written with framework foobar. Can you please take that on? And you'll go there and you'll look at that framework and you'll be like, this is the worst thing ever. And you'll have an opinion about it. And that opinion is valid. But at the same time, you should strive to be excellent when working in that environment. And that's the kind of engineer that's sought after. Somebody who can take whatever is presented before them and run with it and make things happen with it. So while I'll sit here and I'll say I don't like C++ because of the complexity of the language and the slow compile times and et cetera, at the same time, if I sat down at a job and they said, hey, we have a C++ program we need you to write, I'm going to get to it and do that thing. Because even with an intolerably bad language like C++, I can still get the job done. Anyhow, that's my pep talk about being opinionated and still doing the work. I hope that made sense in some way or another. What I'm trying to advise against is being so opinionated that you refuse to do some work. You're like, I hate C++ so much. I'm never, ever going to work in a C++ shop, and all C++ shops are stupid. If you have that kind of opinion, it limits your career options. So go ahead and know why something is better than another thing, but run with it anyway. Right. Another related thing to that is I'm a big fan of using the right tool for the job. And because the right tool for the job depends on the context, that is, it depends on the job itself, I'm reluctant to ever say that some framework is always better than another framework. Even old frameworks and languages like COBOL or PHP, even though I'm having trouble thinking of good applications to start those with, I'm sure if I were pressed, I would be able to come up with some scenario where PHP was actually the best choice for working in that environment. So you can't really ever make the assessment that one framework or language is better than another in a vacuum. You have to take into account how it's going to be used. And that's all kinds of stuff. Not only is it the problem, but maybe you're at a business that's full of COBOL programmers and they have 10 million lines of COBOL in their code base. Like, probably makes sense to use COBOL. So, right tool for the job. I'm a big fan. Okay. Is that enough pep talk stuff? Questions or thoughts from you guys? I don't remember if I told you that this whole, my attitude towards this kind of came around from a scuba diving instructor when I was asking about what kind of rig I should buy. He said, be an excellent diver in whatever you're diving. That sounds like good advice. When your only tool's a hammer, the saying goes, right? Any other thoughts or questions? Excited to get started. Horns. Oh, Tim. Okay, so all this stuff is in training kit. And like I said, with apologies earlier, this normally would have been given to you on Friday, and then you could have blasted through that on Friday afternoon. But instead, we'll do it here. And then tomorrow, you will have the pre-course material, so we won't have to do it in class. We'll just do Q&A and then talk about GraphQL instead or something like that. But let's go and see how it goes. So I think by now you should have basically everything installed that you need. But let me ask, does everybody have pipenv installed? Like if you type this, will it give you back something sensible? Or anything other than command not found? We have it. Fantastic. Again, this is so nice. We used to have this intro to Django first, and it was just huge pain to get all that stuff installed on the first day. All right, and have we used pipenv before? So I can skip my pipenv talk, what it does? Kinda. Some. I'll go through it again then. All right, let's do it. So the idea with pip in general, the pip tool that comes with Python, is that it manages packages. And Python's got all kinds of packages, just like Node has all kinds of packages. And pip is a package manager. It allows you to install packages like Django or like little package X that has functionality Y in it. And that's all great. But it does not allow you to install multiple versions of the same package. And that might be useful. Maybe we have two different Django projects, and one requires Django version X and the other requires Django version Y. We can't install them both at once with pip. So what do? This is the problem that pipenv solves, among others. So pipenv allows different projects on the same machine to have different versions of different libraries on there. So one project could have Django X, the other could have Django Y, and everybody's still happy those exist in isolation. The N means environment. We're going to set up what's called a virtual environment that we're going to do our work in. So for now, like now we're not in a virtual environment. Here I am on my Mac, just in a regular environment, doing nothing in particular. But we can set up a virtual environment, and then we can start installing things within that virtual environment. So if you're in a virtual environment, you install some packages, they're in that one environment. And if you have a different virtual environment and you install some packages there, you can have different packages in those different environments. Not only that, but you can control which version of Python exists within that environment. You probably heard earlier that there's Python 2.7. And look at this, I just ran pip right here, and it says, oh yeah, Python 2.7. And I'm on a Mac, so if I run Python, I see I have Python 2.7.15, which is fine, but older. I also have Python 3 installed, but I have to type Python 3 to make that happen. Wouldn't it be nicer if I could just type Python and we go to Python 3? One of the things pipenv can do is set up an environment such that Python is linked to either Python 2 or Python 3, depending on which one you want. All right. So the first thing I want to do with pipenv is I want to make a new virtual environment. And I can ask for help here. Computer's running slowly today. It's gonna be one of those days. A lot of options, but the one I'm interested in right now is 3, which says use Python 3 when creating the virtual environment. So I'm gonna do one of those. If I can hit the right keys here. And this is gonna create that virtual environment for us. It's making some files. It says it's using my version Python 3.7, which is good because I told it to use Python 3. And then in a minute, it should tell me where it's setting up all this stuff. Windows has different paths to everything. But here in my usersb.local share virtual envs, here's the directory that has all the stuff in it. Normally, you don't need to know anything in this directory, but it's nice to know it's there if you ever want to blow it away. The virtual envs folder gets pretty full if you have a lot of different virtual environments going. Like us instructors here, we do this every cohort, so we've got virtual environments all over the place. Just abandoned and sucking up disk space. So the virtual environment's been created, but we're still not in it yet. We're still just outside the virtual environment, and to get in it, we run pipenv shell, and this should get us into the virtual environment. It says it's launching a subshell. So I was in a bash shell out here. This bash shell has launched a new bash shell. So I'm inside a bash shell that's running in the bash shell at this point. And I can tell I'm in the virtual environment because my prompt has changed. Windows users, I don't believe your prompt changes, but if you never know for sure if you're in the virtual environment or not, you can always try to launch it again, and it'll tell you no if you're already in it. So here we are in the virtual environment. Windows prompt changes. Nice. You didn't used to. I'm a little freaked out right now because this prompt used to change to include the crazy random number at the end. Now it doesn't. And I did just do an upgrade of this thing. Basically, I've upgraded the system. I haven't tried this since then, so maybe we'll get to do some live debugging later. Wouldn't that be fun? All right, what else have we got here? We got this thing called pip file. Let's have a look inside, see what's in pip file. It's got some stuff in here that says requires Python 3.7. Oh, I don't think I had a command before pip3. I was just doing like pipenv -5 version and stuff. So I think pipenv -3 was the first one. And then pipenv shell to launch it. Or am I forgetting? Cat is, yeah, cat's for bash or Unix likes. So if you're on Windows and you're running Cygwin, or if you're running WSL, then cat's gonna work. But if you're on PowerShell, I don't know the command. If you're in the command prompt, I believe the command is type. I think if you say type pip file, and this is for Windows, then maybe it'll do the same thing. Type on the Mac does something else entirely. So many shells. I'm sure PowerShell has a way of just dumping a file out to the screen. I just don't know what it is. I'm going to run another command here and install a package. So normally if we were installing something globally, we'd use pip. So if I wanted to install Django globally, I would do this. But instead of using pip, I'm going to use pipenv to install it within the virtual environment. So I'll do pipenv install Django. Remember, pipenv is what gets it into the virtual environment. Just using pip is going to install it globally. And this might take a little while. Cat works in PowerShell? Yes! Go Microsoft! That's cat actually stands for it's short for concatenate, which means to put things together. And the idea is with cat you can specify a whole bunch of files on the command line and it'll just dump them all to the screen. So I knew the real command in PowerShell had to be something more verbose. PowerShell is not big on concise commands. Oh, it's done. That was suddenly very fast. All right. Let's check out what we got here. We got pip file and pip file.lock. I'm going to look at pip file one more time. Now we see we've got a Django package in here. Our Python package is here. Oh, and also notice now if I type Python at the command line, I'm in Python version 3. I didn't have to type Python 3 that time. So that's all set up for me. What does this remind you of? This whole pip file and pip file.lock. Look at all this crazy stuff. Package.json, sure. So even if you don't know for sure at first if pip file and pip file.lock are the same as package.json and package.json.lock, was it? I can't remember. Even if you're not sure immediately if they do this exact same thing, it seems incredibly suspect. So in my mind, when I'm learning stuff, I think, okay, this reminds me of that other thing. It's probably the same. Not sure yet, but I'm going to flag it as probably the same, and then I'll come back to that if I learn more about it later. So in this case, indeed, they are performing many of the same tasks, and they have the same kind of information in there. Oh, we need this version of this and this version of whatever. So, good observation. Oh. Yeah. I want to do some commits, but I don't want to do them on master. So ignore this part. This is just me because I've cloned the main repo. I didn't fork it. Normally I would have forked it. Then I wouldn't have had to worry about this, but I didn't fork it. So just for me, I'm just checking out a branch so that I don't accidentally commit anything and push it back to the master as I mess with this repo. So you guys don't have to make a branch like I just did. That was just something that I needed to do. All right, now what do we got here? We've got these untracked files. I'm going to go ahead and add those with a oops, I haven't added them at all. Sorry. All right. There we go. Got those committed to Git. Questions or thoughts? I saw some typing going on. Oh, and forgive me, I don't have the Zoom chat window up anywhere. So if stuff is happening in Zoom chat, I'm missing it. How do we, do you mean how do we add it to Git or how do we create it? It gets created when you do, uh, well, actually, when did it first get created? I think it got created when I installed Django. So we didn't have to manually make it. I think when I ran this pipenv install Django, the pip file got created, or the lock file got created at that point. So you totally can use pipenv to install stuff globally, I'm pretty sure, if you just did it in AS, but remember, one of the points of it is to have different versions of Django running in different projects. It only created the pip file. It's always something strange. All right. Well, maybe. Oh, what does this error say? Install Django. And Adam, you're on Windows too? One moment. I'm looking to see if this is an error that we've seen before. Updating pipenv might be the right call. You had to degrade it. So Eric, with your issue, pipenv is finding 364 somehow. Is 364 still installed? And there is another workaround, Eric, on that one. You can edit your pip file And you can change this last line from 3.7. If you just change it to Python version equals 3, that can version equals 3. That makes it a little, Eric, that makes it a little more flexible. And so it'll accept anything. Well, anything that starts with 3 anyway. I know I've had students in the past say that Anaconda gets in the way, but oh, Vance, thanks. That was lame of me not to post that. Apologies. It is in training kit. Everything is in training kit though. Let's see, type error module is not callable. I'm going to record this. I don't know the answer for that type error right away. But it's something we can tear into after class. And then if we find out it is indeed something we just need to upgrade, then I'll put that in the notes. All right. I'm going to move along here, though. We'll just keep blasting ahead, and then we can return and catch up to that after class if we have to. Last week. Fun with tooling. This goes a lot more smoothly than it used to, I think. Like 4 months ago, it was not so smooth, but it still seems like every time you go to do something, I would have had all kinds of problems this morning if I hadn't just happened to try another pip based project last week and nothing was working. Like, what broke? It worked. All right, put that in the notes. Upgrade Pippin fix. Awesome. All right, let's do some more stuff. Now that we've passed step 1 at this point. So this is like install tools that we need. And now we can actually start using Django to get stuff done. So I'm going to do something here. I'm going to start a Django project. And that's sort of the overall umbrella that holds everything within the project. Inside the project, there are things called apps. So a project can have multiple apps within it. And apps might provide different functionality. In this case, we're just going to have one project with one app inside it for demo purposes. I'm going to call my project one thing, and it's going to be a simple notes app. But as we're going to talk about later on, I'm going to have you implement something else other than a notes app, because how many notes apps do you really need? I'm just going to use the notes app as a demo because it's something that you don't have to think about anymore. So instead of concentrating on the application I'm building, which is just a notes app, you can concentrate on how we're building it. Everything really is basically a notes app, yeah. So I'm going to start a project here with a command called Django admin. Django admin is a command that we use to make projects and start and make apps and all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to say start project, and then I'm going to give it a project name. Historically, for fun, we've made a project called Django, but this can be whatever project name you want. Another thing I want to point out right now is look at the small number of commands that we've actually issued to get to this point. We've issued like 4 commands or something to get here. So if you need to start over and make a completely different Django app, no big deal. It's only 4 commands to get to this point. So in fact, I would encourage you to start over and make one from scratch at the end of the day, just to solidify that, the sequence of steps. It only takes like 5 minutes. So I'm going to create the project. And again, the project is the overarching umbrella that holds all the apps. And that's gone ahead and made a directory for me there with some stuff in it. I totally left something off when I made that project. Sorry. I have made an error. I'm going to do some things right now that you should just pretend I'm not doing. Put the blindfold on. Okay, we're going to make a project with Django admin. And I'm going to say start project and the name of the project. And then I'm going to say make it in the current directory. I'm going to put this period at the end so that it builds it in the current directory. I just looked at it there. I'm like, oh, let's put it in the wrong place. So let's do that. Put it in the current directory. And now if I look at the files I have here, we've got some new stuff. I've got manage.py. We're going to make use of that program. And then we've got a Django subdirectory. Again, the name of the project, you can call it whatever you want. And inside that, we've got some stuff in here like settings and URLs and whatever this stuff is. In my mind, when I'm learning a new thing like this, I kind of take inventory. I'm like, oh, I see there's some scripts here. I don't know what any of it does yet, but I see there are scripts there. I'll remember that later and hope that later context gives it meaning. So I've made the project. Now let's make an app within the project. Ooh, yes. Init.py is in there. So I'm going to make an app, and I'm going to call this notes. No need to put this in the current directory. We just say notes, and it's going to crunch on that for a second. Now let's see what we got. Now we have a notes directory as well. Man, fingers are all over the keyboard today. It's similar to the project directory. The app directory has some more stuff in it. Whoa, apps, models, views, admin, migrations. All right. So what have we done? We've set up our tools. We've started a project. We've started an app within the project. Now, and that created that manage.py. Let's make use of that manage.py program and start up a server. Some of you on some systems might have to say Python manage.py to run it. But I'm just going to use /manage.py, and then I'm going to say run server. Every time I run one of these commands, I'm giving a little prayer that it actually works right. So far, so good. All right, it says it started a development server at this address, localhost port 8000. Let me pull up a browser here and check this out. What do we have? Yes, I have made fire. All right, it says I'm seeing this page because debug is true, and I have not configured any URLs. Okay. I saw a bunch of stuff go by in red earlier. What was all that about? What's this thing? You have 15 unapplied migrations. Your project may not work properly until you apply the migrations. For these apps, admin auth content type sessions, run python manage.py migrate to apply them. Oh. We want to talk about migrations quite yet. Let's see here. I think before we talk about migrations, we've been going for about an hour, so why don't we take a 5-minute break and get something warm to drink? And then and think about something else entirely for 5 minutes so that your brain can reset, and then we'll try to figure out what this migration business is. You have a timer here somewhere. All right. Sound good, everybody? Fire away. Think of any questions you might have, and we'll tackle them when we get back in 5 minutes. Coffee time. I'm a lion. I actually drink tea, but for all you lucky people who can drink coffee, coffee time. All right. Are we back? That timer comes with like 12 sounds, and the rooster is the one I find the most humorous. Mm. All right. Anybody have any questions or thoughts that came to mind while we were taking a break there? Those are just dogs in the house. If you hear that, it's probably a deer outside. Space deer. Don't worry, the dogs won't let the space deer in. This is pretty apparent. I didn't copy and paste. Let's see, what did I do? I think we've got these commands, and then the project name, whatever you want, and then what else do we do? Manage.py, run server. I think those were the commands. That we continued on so far. Oh, don't forget the dot. Jeez, man. Did it again. Start project Django dot. That's after you install Django, right? With pip env install. Did I? Yeah, I have that up here somewhere, I think. Yeah, that one. Pip env install Django. Manage.py gets created when you run start project. So when you execute this command right here, that'll make manage.py for you. And it exists right here in the current directory. Get out of this web server. So I've got it right here. Boink. Any other questions? Jonathan, does that answer your question? Where it's coming from? Cool. All right, let's see what this migrations thing is all about, because this is where we start getting into the SQL stuff. So, oops, how did I get out of the page I was on? 1 second, getting back to my notes. What are migrations? What is going on with this web page I'm on? My internets are being bad. Sorry, stand by. Can everybody hear me okay still? Okay. Why it's freaking out. Okay. Anyway, migrations. So, migrations are the glue between Django models and the SQL that is underneath them. Now, I know we got a bit of chicken and egg here because we haven't talked about what a Django model is yet. In fact, we're going to implement one in a minute. But deep down, our data with Django is going to be represented in a SQL database. And we need some SQL commands to set that database up based on what our models look like. So our models are going to be objects that have a bunch of fields in them. Those fields that are within those objects, those get translated by Django into SQL statements that build tables with those columns. So the fields in our objects become columns in our table. And we need a little piece of software to actually make that happen. And that piece of software is called a migration. And they get generated for you automatically. Or I shouldn't say they get generated for you automatically. You can ask them to be generated for you, and then you can run them. So right now, we actually already got a bunch of migrations that exist. They got created for us as part of the boilerplate setup, and they are for these admin, auth, and so on. These are things that Django uses that we don't really need to know that much about at this point in time. But I can see what migrations need to be applied. That is, which programs need to run to set up the database correctly. If I say manage.py show migrations, this will tell me what migrations exist and whether or not they've been applied. So it tells me for these apps, for admin, auth, content types, and sessions, we have all these migrations. These are the migration names out here. And there's no X in the middle of all these checkbox spots, which means they have not been applied yet. And we're going to go through this process one more time after we make a model, just to help cement it. We can actually look and see what SQL will get run if we're curious. You don't have to do this, so this is an optional aside. But for instance, the admin 001 initial migration, let's say I was curious what SQL would be generated. I can say manage.py SQL migrate, and this doesn't actually do anything. It just shows me the SQL that will run later when we do the migration. So I'm going to say for admin, and the migration ID is 001 initial. And let's see what the SQL looks like for that migration. Oh, my computer's chugging today. So here's some SQL. This is what it's going to do when we run this migration. It looks like it's going to create a table called Django admin log with an ID and a bunch of fields, and it's going to put some indexes on it. Again, this is optional. Don't need to know this. Could be useful if your table wasn't getting generated correctly and you needed to go back and debug that. But I'm going to assume that all that SQL is correct since I don't really know the guts of Django anyway. So let's just run the migrations, which will run all these SQL commands and set up the database the way it needs to be set up. That's why when we ran the server, it was warning us, hey, things might not work right because your database hasn't been set up. I know that I have to do all this stuff, but I haven't done it yet. So let's make it happen with manage.py migrate. And this is going to run all the SQL commands that correspond to all these migrations And now if I show migrations again, we should see that they have all been applied. Again, we're going to run through this again after we make a model. And they got the check, the X there means it's been applied. And now if I run the server again, it should fire up without the crazy warning saying, oh, hey, you have unapplied migrations. I feel like my computer is doing 8 zillion things. It's running so slowly. So, yep, no migrations, no problem. Zoom, Slack, and Chrome are using tons of CPU. Don't know what to do about that. Anyway. So that process of showing the migrations here and making the migrations, that kind of only made half sense because we didn't have any models that we made up. Deep inside the Django system, for all its admin stuff we'll see later, there were a bunch of models that came with it. And those models had to be migrated so that the database would be created for them. But what if we make our own model? How's that going to work? Let's make our own model. And then we'll see how that ties in with the migrations. Before I do that, any thoughts on the migration process so far? We'll go over it one more time here, so in a way that hopefully makes a little more sense. Just in case my computer wasn't running slowly enough, let's run VS Code. Let's run VS Code. Computer. Oh boy. Let's stop running VS Code. How about that? Open the VS Code, Hal. If you want to drop a table, would you still run a migration or something else? I don't know. Oh, that's a good one, Sam. I don't know the answer to that because I've never done that before. If you want to drop a table, do you still run the migration? I'm going to have to look that up. I'll put that on my to-do list. That's a good question. All right, it's on the to-do list. Okay, let's look at our Notes app. Remember, Notes is the application that I've made within the DuJour project here. There's a bunch of stuff in here, but one of the files is models. If I pop that open, it says create your models here. Oh, the lag is severe. I may have to change to MVim. I don't even want to think about that. Whatever VS Code was saying, I don't even want to think about it. It will, yeah, if I turn the camera off. But if I have the camera off, then I can't emote. I know you guys can't see me anyway, probably, huh? Or maybe you can. It shows up in the video, though. And then when I gesticulate wildly and talk about things. All right, so the model is what we're going to use to represent our data. I'm missing something. I'm gonna have to look up in my notes. Hang on a second. Let me Google this right now. There we go. Django DB, import models. I knew I had something right. Oh, it's already there. All right. So we're going to make a notes app. So we need a thing that represents a single note record. And we're going to put that in a class here with some class variables in it. So I'm declaring myself a class note. Does anybody remember what it means to have this models.model within the parentheses here? Inheritance. It means our note is going to inherit from models.model. So I can infer a couple things from that. And one of them is that models.model must be a class, and it must have some functionality that we're going to be using. So something, and I'm importing models. This namespace here comes from here, from Django.db. So it's some built-in thing that we're using. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, it's a built-in thing, probably has some functionality. I can look that up later on, but let's move along and add some stuff to it. So for a note, I'm going to add a couple fields here. I'm going to add a title to the note and some content. I'm going to put these in as class variables here. And this is something that's actually kind of powerful. Models within it has a bunch of field types. And I'll get my capitalization right. So here I've said that title is a char field. I can also have something that's like a text field. So a char field is sort of like a one-line text input, but a multi-line text input is called a text field. I'm going to allow this one to be blank. So there I've got two fields here, the title and content. We also need a field to have a unique identifier for this record. So I'm going to put in a unique identifier as well. I'm going to use something called a UID. Are you all familiar with UIDs? UUIDs? Yeah, let's talk about UIDs for just a second. If you're on a Mac on the command line, you could say UID gen, and it makes random UIDs for you. These are basically just big random numbers that are unpredictable. If you're eagle-eyed, you might notice that this number 4 occurs in the same place on every column. So it's not entirely random, but this just means this is a UID of type 4, which means the rest of the numbers are random. I believe the rest of the numbers are random. So it's a good way of coming up with a big random number that can be used for a unique identifier. It's not checked anywhere. Well, actually, that's not true. The database does enforce that it's unique, but generally when you're making UIDs, you don't bother to check if one of them already exists, because this number is so massive. The odds that any of these UIDs that I'm making right now have ever been generated in the history of the universe or will ever be generated again in the history of the universe is actually really low. This is a big, big, big number written down in hexadecimal. I'm sure I could run some fantastic numbers and decide, say like, hey, if you generated 10,000 UIDs per second, then the universe would die of heat death before you managed to get a collision. So it would be nice if we had Python make these for us. So let's go ahead and do that. The question is, what kind of field should we store a UID in? I mean, it's a big string. It's also kind of a number. I don't know. If any guesses what field type we might want to use to store a UID in? We use chars for the little text field. We use text for the bigger text field. Text or blob. These are good guesses. But we can actually get a little more specific with Django. It turns out Django has a lot of field types. There's a UID field for it. Let's use that. Later on, Django actually uses these field types to enforce data integrity, or it can use them to enforce data integrity. For instance, there's a URL field. If you want a URL in there, if you end up writing a Django front end, it will automatically verify that you have a URL in that. And if you just type some random text in there, it'll say, hey, that's not a URL. This is a URL field. I want a URL. So I'm going to give this a few more keyword arguments here. I'm going to say that this is the primary key. And I'm going to say that it's not editable. There's one more thing I want to do, though. I want it to automatically populate with a default value. And the way you can do that is you can say default equals, and then give it a function name that you want to call. Now, Python does have a UID generator. I'm going to say, why don't you call UID4, the UID4 function. Of course, I haven't brought that in from anywhere yet. So let's bring it in from the UID. Oh, the more lag I have, the more typos I make. So I'm going to bring in the UID4 function, and then we'll use that to create UIDs. Here's an aside. You don't have to do this at all, but just to demonstrate, if I bring up Python and I bring in that function, I can run it, and sure enough, it's putting out type 4 random UIDs for us. So that's what we're going to do here in our code. We'll generate our UID that way. Nope, that's a typo. What did I say? Blank equals true. That's me getting my languages mixed up. Good catch. The problem with knowing multiple languages is that you continuously confuse them. You'll probably see me put a lot of semicolons at the end of lines as well. Do I need parens with UID4? I don't here. That's a good question. Instead of calling this function right there and getting a result, we're actually going to just pass in a pointer to the function, and we'll let the model call the function itself. So it doesn't want it called right now. It just wants the name of the function so it can call it later. That's a good question, though. All right, so we've got our little tiny note here. So we've made this model, and we know that eventually these fields that we put in the model, like ID, title, and content, we will want those to be columns in a database. So we'll be able to have a database where each row in the database is a different note, and each note has an ID, title, and content column in the database. We want all that to happen. And what is the mechanism we're going to use in Django to make it happen? We've got the model. We want the SQL. What do we have to do in the middle? Migrations. We got to do some migrations. I got to get focused so I can copy this out. So laggy. This is all in training kit, so I'm just putting it here for convenience. Oh, like my video and voice is lagging? I'm gonna have to reboot this Mac. It's freaking out. Well, let's see if we can get through it. Tell me if it gets so bad that you can't understand me. My voice is flawless. Oh. All right, so let's see what we got. There's one more boilerplatey thing that we have to do first. Yay, more boilerplate. So we've created an app called Notes with Start App, with Django Admin Start App. We did that earlier. But right now, this app isn't really active. That is, the project itself has not exposed it. So we have to kind of activate this app. Oh no, it's not updating. Stop share. Everything is so laggy. What about now? Turn off my camera. All right. Let's see, what are we doing? Oh yeah, so we need to tell the project. Again, I've called my project du jour. You can call yours whatever you want. I need to tell it in my settings.py file. We're going to be coming back to settings.py a lot. We need to tell it what apps are installed. And right now it says, oh, hey, admin auth content types and sessions and messages and static files. Again, if you're eagle-eyed, admin auth content types and sessions, you might recognize those as those migrations we had to do earlier that came with the system. It's actually working a lot faster for me now too. Is it my video? Start video. What about now? Experiments. That definitely makes it lag a lot more. All right, well, let's leave it for that for now. I'm going to add to my installed apps, notes, notes. So this line right here within installed apps is saying, oh, hey, I want notes to be one of the things that you're running right now, please. So a little bit of boilerplate we have to do to activate notes. We don't have to do this again now that it's already turned on. So this, again, was in settings.py within the project. So now that that's there, let's see what we have in terms of migrations. Notes. it says we have no migrations. It knows about notes because we added it to our settings.py. All these other migrations have been applied. We did those earlier, but we don't actually have any migrations yet for notes, which is kind of interesting. We have the model, but what we really need is that code, that Python code that creates the SQL statements for us. Fortunately, we don't have to write that. We can just ask Django to make it for us with make migrations. Manage.py make migrations. It's going to look at all the apps. It's going to figure out which ones haven't had their migrations made yet. And it's going to build them. And it says, oh, hey, I saw you have notes here. There's a model called Note. It hasn't been created yet. I better make a migration to create that. If I say make migrations again, it's going to say nobody's changed anything, so no need to do anything here. I've already made that migration. And now if I say show migrations, we'll see that Notes now has a migration called 0001 initial. So that step after making the model was, oops, how about I finish typing this? Manage.py make migrations. Again, optionally, we can peek under the hood right here, and we see in the notes directory, there is a migrations directory. And in here, there is a file called 001initial.py. We can look at it. It says generated by Django, so we didn't write this. And it's got a migration in it. And we don't need to know any of this. Again, this is an optional aside. But here we see that it calls migrations create model. It's got a model name. It's got some fields, very similar to the fields we typed in earlier. So it's built this for us. Also, a quick note on this generated by. If you ever write a program that generates another program's code, it's a really good idea to put a header in there that says, hey, this was generated by this program. Not only does it tell people where to go if it's not working, but it also warns me to not modify this by hand unless I know what I'm doing, because it was a generated code. So, all right, so we've got that. And then what's the last command? We got to run the migrations, so we're going to do manage.py migrate. And that should actually apply that migration. And it says it did, applying the notes 0001 initial. That worked out okay. If I say migrate again here, it says I got nothing to do. So no harm in running these commands multiple times. If we look at our migrations now, we see that it's been applied. Everybody's happy. I should be able to run the server. It's always a good test to make sure that your code is right. If you can run the server, then at least there are no syntax errors in it. So, hooray! Of course, we haven't done anything with this model yet. But we've created it. Oh, unless we can also check out that SQL, right? Manage.py SQL migrate, just so we can see what the SQL looked like to create the table. Again, you don't have to look at this. It's just kind of blessed familiarity. If you remember your SQL, this one seems sensible enough. Create table notes underscore note. It's got an ID field. It's got a title field. It's got a content field, just like our model did. And we can see what it's using for these to store them. The title is a varchar 200. Content is a text type. And it looks like for the UID, it shows a char 32 as the storage type for that. But we didn't have to write any of this code, which is kind of cool. So everybody thinking, looks a lot like Codex. Questions and thoughts? So far, so good. I like the description that it's the more batteries included because, yeah, it has tons and tons of functionality in it. To continue that analogy, it's almost like though you have 10,000 sizes of batteries and you have to figure out how to put them all in. So it's got batteries included. There's just a whole lot of them, and so the challenge with Django for me has always been what are all the tools that it provides. It's like it provides so many of them that putting together can be challenging. Yeah, Jordan, like I said, I totally encourage you to like make one more or two more Django projects just because it's such a simple sequence of steps to get it done. After doing two of them, you'll be like, okay, there we go. This is how what we had to do to get it set up. No big deal. I'm going to give you a sneak preview of the ORM right now. Our Python uh, way of accessing the database. And I'm going to do this by bringing up a Python shell that's Django aware. And so you can do manage.py shell, and this will bring up your regular Python shell, except it is in a Django context. And I'm not actually sure what it's doing in here, but I think it's automatically loading all the Django libraries for us to use. But we just made a note, so let's go ahead and bring that thing in. So I'm going to say from the notes module, which is our app name in that subdirectory, from models.py, bring in note. And now if I say what's note, it's going to say it's a class, notes models note, which is great. Let's make a new one. So I'm going to just use the regular constructor. And I'm going to make a new note. And now I can say, hey, what's that? It's a note object. That looks suspiciously like the UID. So we can look up all that stuff. No big deal. Pretty straightforward. But right now, that note has just been created in memory here. It's not actually in the database at all. So how do we get this to persist? How do we get this to store in the database? Turns out it's like this. N.save. Now it's in the database. It's been committed. I'm going to make another note object here. Title is example 2. And content is, this is another test. So I made myself a new note. Again, it's not in the database yet, but if we say n.save, now it is in the database. So I've committed 2 notes to the database. Let's go retrieve them. Normally, you'd be doing all this stuff that I'm doing right now. You'd be doing that in code. We'll write some code later that does this kind of stuff. But right now, I've just brought it up in the Python shell in the REPL just for demonstration purposes. Normally, we don't do a lot of stuff in the REPL. So it turns out remember note inherited from models.model. So we didn't write this functionality. We didn't write note.objects, but note got it from the model here. So in models.model, it has this functionality we're about to use. Note.objects.all. Note.objects is the way to get into the ORM And .all is one of the methods at your disposal. There's also .filter for bringing out specific notes. There's .get for searching by primary key. There's tons of stuff, and we're just going to do this little preview today. But note.objects.all will give us back a query set, and the query set, you can think of it as like an array, and it's got some results in it. So you see our array here. Each element has a note object in it. So let me put that in a query set, QS, and now I can look and see what that is. Let's see what the title of note 0 is. Title of note 1. So note.objects.all is one of the ORM methods that you have at your disposal for getting stuff out of the database. So we made the note using a regular constructor. Since it inherited from model, it had the model save functionality attached to it. So we said note.save to store it in the database. And then we used note.objects with the note class to access the database. So hey, we've stored stuff and we've retrieved stuff. I'm dancing around in front of the camera even though it's off. Is that what's everybody think? Again, normally you'd write this stuff in a Python file somewhere, but we're just using the REPL to demo it. Yeah. More thoughts, questions? You're probably noticing that it's a lot of like particular things to type. At least we managed to get into models.py, so here's some creativity for you. Why Django? You mean why would I use Django in a project, or why are we teaching Django at Lambda school? Why use it in a project? So that's actually a good question. And the answer isn't really simple. So I apologize for hand waving, and you can't see me waving my hands anyway. But why would you use it? So there are a lot of factors that go into the decision-making process about which technology to use for which project. And sometimes it's because that technology has a killer feature that you really like and you're going to use it. So like maybe you really like how the Django ORM works and you really like how it does its SQL stuff. And maybe you want it to be SQL because your work has access to a big pile of SQL databases already. And so there are all kinds of factors like that that go into it, like what technology fits in best with what the goal of the project is, but also what technology fits in best with the existing technology of that business is a massive factor into making that decision. So a lot of people find Django to be pretty fast in terms of the amount of code you need to write in order to get a REST API up and running. It doesn't take that long. So when somebody needs something quick, Django seems to go pretty quick. If the rest of your stack is Node, it would be points against Django right there. Like, why would you bring in an additional technology when Node's everywhere else? You're using Express already, so why don't we just keep using that? And that kind of momentum that a company has around a particular technology, that's worth something. It's worth, even like imagine a case where you look at a problem and you're like, man, Django is exactly the right tool for this, but this is a Node shop. There's actual money tied up in that decision. And the higher ups may say, yes, Django is the right tool for this job, but we're not going to make as much money if we switch to it because of the overhead needed if we do. So all these things come into play. Yep. It's pretty opinionated about that SQL database too. There is a project out there I've seen to try to make it work with Mongo instead, but it's definitely like an apples and oranges kind of thing. Getting Django to work with Mongo is not a match made in heaven. Let me put it that way. It's pretty kludgy. Django wants SQL. It's good with a variety of SQL databases. So right now, we're using SQLite, but later on when we deploy, we'll tell it to use PostgreSQL instead. Would we have to remigrate still if we change the model? I love this question. Let's do it. I'm going to go ahead and add a URL field. And as you might imagine, that has a URL field. I think we can allow it to be blank. I think that kind of works. So I've just added a new field. I've changed my model. Our database looks like one thing, but the model looks like another thing. And I actually have a better demo of this later on, but not today. But let's do this. Let's check this out really fast. So the SQL table does not have a URL, but our model does. Let's just get a lay of the land here. Let's show migrations. We don't have anything new for notes, but it's because we haven't made migrations yet. So when you change the model, do make migrations. And so there it's made a new migration. It's added this handy little comment, adding the field URL to note. Okay, great. And now if we show migrations again, we see we have our second migration, and now we need to remigrate. And there we go. So fast and easy. I was also going to point out we now have a SQLite database that's been created for us automatically. Later on, we'll do some stuff to look in there, peek inside, and see what it looks like. There's one more thing in Training Kit that I wanted to talk about today that I didn't get a chance to. So I'm going to just go to this page right here and paste it in for you. It is the adding a .env file stuff. So there is something here, a bit of a gotcha in settings.py. If you were looking earlier, you might have seen this go by. Secret key. Not so secret now that I've broadcast it to everybody. This secret key is used for doing things like encrypting passwords and stuff. This shouldn't be shared publicly, and it shouldn't go into source control. So I haven't checked in this file yet into source control, and that was kind of deliberate because I didn't want to commit that had my secret key in it. So there's a section there about adding the .env file where you can go hide your secret key, not commit it into source control. And so definitely check that thing out. And lastly, I know it's 11, but I want to brainstorm for 2 minutes about what else we want to do. So I'm doing notes, but I want you all to do something else. Unless you really love notes, in which case come to me and say, Beej, I really love notes. I want to make a notes app. And I'm sure we can work something out. But let's brainstorm. If you were going to make anything, what kind of stuff would you want to store in your database? And this is like personal interest, maybe, or Maybe you love LPs. You have an LP collection. You want a database full of that. Personally, I love maps. I would make a database full of GPS waypoints. So yeah, let's just brainstorm, throw out ideas. And the rule here is you can implement an idea of yours or you can steal anybody else's idea. So if you've got a big patent on something and your plans for a startup around keeping track of your refrigerator food, maybe don't share it. PCs or RPG, food in the fridge. Oh, that'd be so good. Shelter dogs. Yeah. What else? Even if it's something you're not going to implement, what could you do here? Products from a shop, voting, takeout place reviews. Oh, it's lunchtime, isn't it? A project idea of project ideas. I love that. Oh, books. Yes. Track retro games. Do you like Mule? Mule is my favorite retro game. Wine database. My girlfriend joined a wine club, and of course, like everybody who joins a wine club, she's now overflowing with wine. I love all these ideas. So, one of your tasks for today is to choose one of these ideas or a different idea, whatever you'd like, and bring up your fork of the repo up to the point that we've gotten through today, plus the .env file, and implement your model. Get all that stuff going. Job prospects. Remember the goal at the end of the week, we're going to have a REST API for this stuff, not necessarily a front end, but if you want to range ahead and start doing front end stuff, I won't stop you at all. Okay, gang. Any last minute questions? Sorry for going over. Again, the goal for the day, get up to date, up to as far as we've gotten. Implement your own class or your own model class. And then I'll have a couple more videos to watch for tomorrow. Oh, let's see, Erica, is that question about how I launched Visual Studio or? Let's see, you have to install Django after you clone the repo. But it doesn't get installed within that folder, if that's your question. When you do like pip-env install Django, it goes into the virtual environment folder elsewhere. And in terms of stuff to commit, we basically want to commit everything to Git I just haven't done it yet because I haven't moved that secret key out of my settings yet. Oh, so I'm doing this out of the root of the cloned repo. So I cloned intro to Django right here, and I'm running everything from there. So the root of the repo. Did that answer it? All the commands I have run from here. Yeah, you can just use the when you do your clone of your fork, um, then you can just switch into the intro Django directory that it creates. But yeah, it just has to have a directory that you can do everything out of. Well, it depends on what you mean by root. Do you mean the root of the repo or your home directory or the root of the file system? So I made mine in temp CS12. So it just can be anywhere, wherever you normally clone your repos onto your file system. Just go ahead and clone it there, and then CD into intro Django, which is, and I'll repost this repo right now. So fork that repo like you normally do. Git clone your fork, and then CD into intro Django and run everything from there. All right, gang. Start my laggy video again and stop my share. Here I am. So I'll post a recap of all that stuff. I'll post this video, and I will also post some videos to watch for tomorrow so that we'll be all caught up. And I think you'll find that it's pretty easy going, except for some technical glitches that tend to come up with tooling. So definitely keep all those technical glitches, all those questions coming to the help channel, and we'll try to work through them. It always happens. The code Django changes over time, and it seems like from month to month there's always something crazy that's happened, like that weird module error from not having pipenv up to date, stuff like that. So right, it's lunch time. Have fun hacking, everybody, and I'll keep those questions coming. Talk to you soon.